Investigators searched through the remnants of a house fire that killed the wife of a policeman. At first, carelessness looked like the probable cause. But when pathologists, toxicologists, and chemists took a closer look around, they found the cause was far more complicated. On a cold February morning in Green Bay, Wisconsin, Lola Cater drove.
In this particular situation, I did observe a V pattern consistent with the fire burning on the couch,
which is where Sandy's body was found. The fire didn't spread beyond the living room.
The supply of oxygen appeared not to have been sufficient to allow that fire to burn freely, and when the oxygen had been depleted in the structure, the fire burned itself out.
The living room was littered with empty vodka bottles and cigarette butts.
A lot of overflowing ashtrays, cigarettes that had just been laid down on tabletops, and phone books that literally burnt themselves out in scorched surfaces.
Investigators knew Sandy Maloney since her estranged husband was a fellow police officer.
Sandy was the love of my life. It's like your soulmate, that, you know, that the one time that you meet someone in your life that, you know, you feel like you're going to spend the rest of your life with them.
In the early 90s, Sandy injured her back and became addicted to painkillers. She also started drinking heavily. 2 separate hospital visits failed to cure her addiction.
It totally consumed who she was. She was no longer that fun wife and great mother. The kids would get home from school and Sandy would already be totally intoxicated, you know, at the point of staggering and, you know, not really being able to talk all that well even.
I knew things were wrong. I mean, when there's bill collectors calling and things like that, and when you have an addiction, you're losing money to feed that addiction, and they didn't have money to pay their bills, and that's what most of the arguments that my mom and dad had were surrounding, so I wasn't totally oblivious to what was going on.
Not surprisingly, when the Maloneys separated, John got custody of their 3 children. Sandy continued on a downward spiral.
There was arguing, and John was just swearing and just angry all the time, and things got worse all around. That house was like it was going to explode.
She just mostly stayed in the house and kept the phone off the hook and pretty much lost contact with everyone who she used to talk to.
The preliminary indications were that the fire started by a cigarette Sandy left burning carelessly. But Sandy's autopsy said something quite different. To find out for certain what killed Sandy Maloney, her body was sent to the medical examiner for an autopsy.
When you look at a fire death, what you're looking for are injuries that are not consistent with the fire.
Sandy had a history of alcohol and drug abuse, so blood samples were sent for toxicology testing. Using gas chromatography, scientists could identify all of the elements present in Sandy's system. Sandy's blood alcohol level was 0.25, more than twice the legal limit in Wisconsin.
Forensic pathologists, for the most part, do not consider a blood alcohol level to be in the lethal range until it gets up above 0.4, especially in someone that was a chronic drinker.
Sandy was discovered face down on the sofa.
That's not a common scenario for someone that is just intoxicated. They would tend to collapse, and even though they are intoxicated, the lower brainstem functions, if you will sort of make their face move to the side so they can get some air. She was face down into that pillow.
And there was something else suspicious. The carbon monoxide levels in her blood were only 8%.
When a person dies as a result of a fire, their carbon monoxide levels are usually up 70% or higher. So the carbon monoxide levels of Sandra Maloney at the time of death were consistent with her being dead prior to the fire.
And the medical examiner found even more evidence to support this view.
You would expect the entire trachea to have a black lining of soot, all the way from the upper portion of the throat, all the way down and spreading out into the 2 lungs. Sandy only had a very small amount of soot in her airway, much less than we would normally see.
And there were bruises in the muscles around Sandy's neck and her back.
This would be very consistent with someone being on top of her, maybe a knee, maybe arms, as she's being held down into the cushion of the couch and strangled.
They also found a vertical, not horizontal, gash on the back of Sandy's head.
There was a broken ashtray there in the room. Whether or not that was the implement that was used, that is the type of implement, a heavy, edged object like this ashtray that could have caused this kind of an injury.
Sandy was found on the sofa without a blouse. In a basement clothes hamper, investigators found a corduroy shirt covered with blood.
Somebody apparently attempted to have that concealed under some other clothing, but the bleeding on that corduroy shirt was consistent with where her head injury was on her body, and that raised a lot of red flags.
Given the totality of the evidence that we had in this case, it was obvious that this was definitely a homicide. This was death at the hands of another.
At the scene of the fire, investigators found several suspicious items. A burned book of matches underneath a cloth baseball cap, and tissues rolled and stuffed into the seat cushions. Arson investigators called them trailers.
These trailers that I saw on the couch and in front of the couch indicated to me that whoever committed this crime had some, at least fundamental knowledge of fire and how fire burned, and what methods to use to carry fire from one place to another.
Now, with evidence of a homicide and arson, Sandy's estranged husband John became the prime suspect. But he had an alibi. He was at home with his girlfriend on the night of the fire.
My kids were with me the whole night, and Tracy Hillenbrand was there.
We just thought maybe randomly something happened. Maybe one of her friends, maybe they were getting into drugs bad or something like that.
Despite the alibi, investigators noted that John had recently taken classes in arson investigation as part of his ongoing training as a police officer.
I can tell you absolutely that I did not have anything to do with Sandy's death. I did not kill Sandy.
To solve the mystery of Sandy Maloney's death, investigators needed to know as much as possible about the house fire. The evidence clearly showed it started in the living room.
The burn patterns on the floor in front of the couch at the area of deep charring and back away toward the center of the room, that pattern was very reminiscent of a liquid type of accelerant being poured on the floor. It was a very irregular, elongated pattern.
Debris from the couch area was collected in an airtight can and sent to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab for testing. At the lab, scientists placed an activated charcoal strip inside to collect gases from the debris. Later, it was washed in a sterile solution and analyzed.
A gas chromatograph, which is a piece of equipment that can actually look for the individual components inside gasoline, kerosene, etc. And they get basically a tracing, right? Looks like kind of like an EKG, up and down lines. But those peaks to the forensic chemist mean different things, mean different particular chemical components.
The chromatograph found no accelerants in the debris, but the empty vodka bottle at the fire scene suggested a possible explanation.
It would not be unusual for vodka to have been used as an accelerant and then have the lab results come back negative because the vodka either burned up as a result of the fire or dissipated after the fire.
There was one piece of evidence that suggested Sandy must have known the person who started the fire. There were no signs of forced entry, and all of the doors were locked.
One key to the door was found on Sandra Maloney's keychain laying on the cupboard in the kitchen. A second key had been given to John Maloney years before when the door was installed and never returned. And there were only 2 keys to that door. So immediately that brought John Maloney into the forefront as a suspect.
Sandy's estranged husband denied this.
Her mother and I are not the only ones that had a key to the house. There was a key that the kids had access to. Her friends had duplicate keys. So when I moved out of the house, the locks were changed, so I didn't have keys. I had at one point had a key to an outside storm door lock. That would be the only thing that I would have a key to.
And investigators found evidence of motive. John had agreed to pay Sandy $450 a month in alimony, plus half his assets and pension in a divorce settlement. Police now realized that John's girlfriend, Tracy Hillenbrand, may have had a financial motive as well.
There was some thought that they both knew about the homicide or maybe both participated. So she was somebody that had some hostility towards Sandy Maloney and needed to be looked at.
Tracy said she was at home with John on the night of the murder, but investigators added some pressure, telling her she could be charged as an accessory to the crime. So she changed her story. She now said she was taking a nap and didn't know where John was at the time of the fire. She also said John was behaving suspiciously later that night.
His girlfriend Tracy did point out some nervous behavior, some shaking when he was back at the residence, and also some smell of smoke on his person.
Tracy agreed to help police by wearing a hidden microphone while she questioned John about the incident. But during those conversations, John denied any involvement. It wasn't until several months later, while on vacation in Las Vegas, that the conversations became more interesting. Of the murder, but he was wrong. There wasn't enough oxygen inside the house for the fire to spread, and it burned out quickly.
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that John Maloney is the killer. John Maloney did not do very well as an arsonist. He should have done a little more research.
To cement their case, investigators asked John's girlfriend Tracy to question him about the fire while they listened. And they placed a hidden camera and microphone in their Las Vegas hotel room while they were there on vacation.
The surveillance in Las Vegas and what showed up on the tape really gave us an insight into not only the relationship of John and Tracy, but his dark side.
And they also revealed John's feelings towards his estranged wife, Sandy.
It proves he hated her. He hated her. He called her effing slob and effing anorexic drunk, and he just wanted to be rid of her.
After hours of denials, John eventually admitted that he was inside his wife's home on the day of the fire.
What did you go here for?
To get done with the divorce, get it done with.
Okay. Rich, get to court tomorrow, right?
No, go get it done with and quit making the kids suffer.
John Maloney had been maintaining right from the beginning that he hadn't been in the house and hadn't been in the house for a long time. His admission that he was in the house the night that the homicide occurred really pulled everything else together.
What's been blood protruding from her
I'm
body?
not answering that. Maybe there's some vodka bottles there, huh, Tracy?
The fire was an accident.
No.
You didn't burn her alive.
No.
At one point in the conversation, it appeared that John would physically assault Tracy.
John Maloney has Tracy Hillenbrand backed up against the wall, and he does place his hands up near her throat. And, it just flashed in my mind when I saw that John Maloney is very capable of committing this crime.
What people don't realize is it was like 4:30 in the morning that she woke me out of a sleep to start this interrogation. I was very angry. I was very angry that I was being accused continually of doing something, killing someone, when I hadn't.
But to investigators, the tape showed otherwise. John Maloney was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. At the trial, his defense basically conceded the strength of the forensic evidence.
There was really not much effort made, matter of fact, no effort made, during John's trial to challenge the state's assertion that this was in fact an incendiary fire. The defense essentially rolled over and accepted the state's findings without scientific challenge.
Instead, the defense pointed their finger at Tracy Hellenbrand, saying she was the real killer.
The physical evidence, the forensic evidence, the statements of witnesses, their observations, only point to one person, and that's John Maloney.
We, the jury, find the defendant, John R. Maloney, guilty of first-degree.
John Maloney was found guilty of first-degree murder, arson, and mutilating a corpse. He was sentenced to life in prison.
I was very much so shocked by the outcome of my trial, because I thought that there was more than enough reasonable doubt.
John Maloney continues to maintain his innocence.
I did not have anything to do with Sandy's death. I did not kill Sandy. I'm scared of maybe spending the rest of my life in prison for something, a crime that I was convicted of and didn't do.
His son Matt refuses to believe that his father is a killer.
All evidence in the basement and upstairs point to an accidental death. I mean, I love my mom, but I just want everyone to know how my mom did really die and that my dad's not responsible for it.
But forensic science painted a picture of what actually happened in Sandy's home before the fire.
The autopsy serves as the voice of the dead, the silent witness to the crime. Had the autopsy not disclosed what it disclosed about Sandy's death, this could have been put down as an accidental death.
This case could not have been solved without the physical findings of the police investigators at the scene. And without forensic evidence, we might have a killer still on the loose.
All of these forensic evidences are so important. And we were just overwhelmed with the good job that the prosecution had done.
I think he's a cold-blooded killer, and high school sweetheart or not, he committed this crime. The evidence was there. He did it, and he got caught, and now he's paying for it.
For 7 years, a group of bank robbers flaunted their expertise in front of security cameras, and law enforcement could do little more than watch and marvel. They left no forensic evidence behind and always got away before police arrived. But how they stood, what they said, and the clothes they wore all told a story, one that could be deciphered by forensic science. Calabash, North Carolina is a quiet fishing town located just over the state line from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
To sum it up, is a perfect place to live, quiet, the best seafood in the world, and that's how Calabash was known.
In September of 1991, in broad daylight, 2 masked men with handguns walked into one of the local banks. A teller pushed the silent alarm, but the robbers got away with $40,000 before police arrived.
The closest police station was our county complex, which is about 25 to 30 miles away.
The bank was equipped with surveillance cameras that used 35mm film.
In most instances, we have bank surveillance videotapes, which don't give us a lot of quality and don't allow us the opportunity to enhance the photos.
The pictures showed a well-organized crime.
Some individuals go in banks with no gloves, no mask, and no plan. Those are the easiest ones to catch. The folks that are well-planned, well-orchestrated, prove to be the most difficult challenge in law enforcement.
The men entered the bank just after an armored truck made its daily delivery of cash from the Federal Reserve Bank.
They didn't walk around the bank like nervous or anything, and they had a getaway car waiting, and they were watching the getaway car the whole time. They could see it through the door.
The high-resolution pictures gave investigators a good look at the getaway car, driven most likely by a third accomplice.
We were able to determine it was a Camaro. We were able to determine the year of the vehicle, certain packages that came with the vehicle that were not standard.
But without the license plate number, it would be difficult to find the car. With so few clues, the robbery went unsolved until 1 year later. It happened again at the very same bank.
We have a bank robbery in progress.
It was turning our quiet town, known for its seafood, into a quiet town known for its bank robberies.
A bank employee recognized them.
She recognized the voice, the way they stood, the same directives. She was positive the same people were robbing her over and over again. In fact, the statement she made was deja vu.
One of the robbers is about 5'8" and nearly 300 pounds. It was fairly distinct. They got identified that way as being the same people.
The robbers warned the tellers not to throw die packs in the money bags. Die packs are rigged to explode later, leaving a permanent die on the bills.
One of the news crews had come down. It sort of made me mad. That reporter stood in the middle of the street in Calabash and made the comment, "If you want to rob a bank, Calabash is the place to come and do it."
Over the next several years, these same men robbed other banks in the area. The getaway cars were stolen and abandoned miles away.
They were not making a lot of mistakes. They were going in, they were getting what they needed to get, and they got out of the bank.
We had no hairs, we had no fibers, we had no confessions, we had no money. We had very few bits of real physical evidence.
Over a 4-year period, there were 6 bank robberies stretching from Calabash, North Carolina, down to Myrtle Beach across the state line. Each robbery lasted between 2 and 5 minutes, and none of the branches had armed security personnel.
Very meticulous, very structured, very organized, in, out, and gone. And you're in a rural area. I think you have to be both lucky and good.
And the crimes were becoming increasingly violent.
Get head down! The one, usually the obese robber in this case, went behind the teller's counter and threatened to kill him. And the other one rounded up any customers or other bank employees, sometimes forced them into one office or forced them onto the ground.
In one particular bank robbery, a warning shot was fired at a bank manager. We had several instances where tellers were struck, were dragged, were beaten, were threatened.
In one instance, when an employee hesitated in opening the bank vault, it almost cost her her life.
She was shaking so badly, she couldn't do the combination. That individual cocked the weapon against her head and said, "This is your last chance. You open the vault or you're dead."
Investigators tried to predict where and when the robbers would strike again. But they never imagined what would happen next. The robbers returned to Calabash and hit the same bank for the 3rd time. It turned out to be their biggest heist to date. They walked out of the bank with $175,000. But this time, there was a witness outside.
I had to kind of take a double take to make sure I was seeing what I thought I saw. And then I realized it was a bank robbery in progress.
King saw 2 men run from the bank and get into a green car driven by a 3rd man. King wrote down the license plate number, then did something law enforcement officers discourage. He followed them. The chase reached speeds of 80 miles per hour. At one point, the robbers stopped their car, turned around, and confronted him.
They were sitting in the intersection, stopped, aimed back in my direction, and one of the guys was out of the car with a gun. And so I just laid over in the seat and just kicked it. You kicked the gas and just shot by him as fast as I could.
He still had the license plate number which identified the car as stolen. It It was later found abandoned in the same area as the other getaway cars, along a deserted road in South Carolina.
We told him how brave and how not brave it was. We're tickled to death that he helped us, but we didn't want him to get hurt, and luckily he didn't.
I don't think what I did was anything close to heroic. I think it was just a civic duty almost to try to help catch these guys.
The robbers didn't strike again until almost a year later, this time in Myrtle Beach, about 20 miles away. They always seemed to be one step ahead of law enforcement, and investigators were beginning to understand why. It was something they saw in a surveillance picture.
For prosecutors and cops that work in bank robberies, not many robbers wear holsters, okay? And this guy wore a police-type holster on his belt to carry his gun, which was quite distinct.
And it was clear that the two men inside the bank knew how to handle a weapon.
This wasn't the first time this individual had ever picked up a gun, and we felt like there was some training involved and planning involved in these robberies.
There was also something strange about the way one of the robbers stood.
The old Weaver stance, which was a type of a stance that you're trained to do in police work back in the late 80s and 90s. And he just had a manner in which he held his gun in his hand that was unusual. It's hard to describe.
We thought there was a high possibility that it was somebody that had maybe gone through some kind of law enforcement training or even military training.
Investigators now knew how the robbers were getting away with the crimes. Police now believe that the men robbing banks throughout North and South Carolina were somehow involved in law enforcement. Over a 6-year period, they had gotten away with close to $500,000. Their favorite target was the small town of Calabash. At the time, the nearest police station was a 20-minute drive away. They robbed the same bank 3 times.
I think that they had nerve to go into these banks on more than one occasion, but also to stay inside the banks as long as they stayed in.
Why? In a pickup truck who appeared to be the lookout, and he wrote down the license plate number. When the robbers drove away in a red SUV, the customer followed them.
That individual followed both of those vehicles along a route that in one of the previous bank robberies, another witness had followed the getaway vehicle, and they both took exactly the same route.
The bank customer eventually lost the robbers, but the license plate number turned out to be an enormous break. The truck belonged to Alvin Bellamy, a landscaper who lived in rural South Carolina. The FBI went to the Bellamy's home. Around 1 a.m., a car approached the Bellamy home, but it wasn't Alvin. It was Alvin's brother, Larry, who was a lieutenant.
Hanging in.
The manufacturer lines up the breast pockets to match the overall pattern on the garment.
Anytime you have a pattern that has to be aligned, it's got to be done by a human, and it costs the company money. Therefore, the more alignment you have in the pattern, the more expensive your shirt is going to be.
In an inexpensive shirt, the manufacturer, in this case the Arrow Company, doesn't even attempt a match.
By going to Arrow, we asked the people who were there, okay, exactly what are you trying to line up here? Exactly what are you doing when you make this shirt?
The manufacturer aligned the breast pocket at a 45-degree angle. Because of the pattern, all points of alignment at the seams happen at random.
The more seams I can see and the more uniqueness that I can determine, in this case, the bank robber stood at the same place and basically turned around a couple times, and I had some outstanding views of various seams.
And Davies discovered the alignment of the pattern at all of those random points was identical. In the surveillance pictures, Davies noticed another distinctive mark, a discoloration in the fabric on the left sleeve.
I saw a little light mark in what should have been a gray square. You're seeing the white threads that's below the dyed gray.
He found the same anomaly, a tear in the material in the exact same spot on Bellamy's jacket.
I was absolutely sure that it was that jacket.
So there's no doubt whatsoever.
No doubt.
The examination of the plaid shirt by the FBI was exceptional. We've never seen or heard of this before. This was a new process to us.
What I couldn't tell was who the bank robber was, but what I could tell was the jacket robbed the bank.
Investigators now had to prove that one of the Bellamy brothers wore the jacket. And they also wanted to find the money. The FBI's photographic analyst determined that the jacket found in Claude Bellamy's home had been worn by one of the bank robbers. From the surveillance pictures, it appeared to be Larry Bellamy. Larry was a lieutenant in the Myrtle Beach Police Department. His supervisor, Warren Gall, recognized him in the pictures by the way he held his gun.
I have been on the range numerous times with Larry when we were qualifying for the police department, and I knew his stance, I knew his pose, and it was exact.
Larry's shooting stance was unique. It was a combination of two different styles taught at the police academy.
Larry had never really adjusted to the new stance and shot with a hybrid sort of stance in between the old square-shouldered stance and the newer Weaver stance that was quite distinctive. A number of these witnesses had been on the shooting range practicing with him for years and recognized that shooting stance.
Larry knew a great deal about bank robbery because he was a crime scene specialist.
He worked bank robberies as a crime scene officer. He took fingerprints, photographs. He communicated with bank tellers and employees in the FBI in the incidents that occurred in Myrtle Beach.
He was aware of evidence. He was aware of what is looked for in terms of evidence at a crime scene.
Incredibly, Larry Bellamy helped investigate one of his own crimes.
Hindsight being 20/20, looking back at the day that we located a stolen car, I remember Larry Bellamy showing up on the scene, offering his assistance to us because he was a crime scene officer with the Myrtle Beach Police Department.
Larry's timesheets indicated he was not working when the robberies occurred. Investigators also discovered an interesting clue in the way the getaway vehicles were abandoned.
They were so successful for so many years that they just got sloppy. And towards the end, they started using their own cars to carry out the robberies.
Investigators found the red SUV used at their last robbery at a safe house the brothers rented about 100 miles away in Aberdeen, North Carolina. By the time the FBI found it, everything else was gone.
We never recovered the money from these bank robberies, and there was a total take of approximately $800,000.
When you break down that amount of money over that time frame, split maybe 3 ways, we felt that it would be easy to spend that type of money without a great deal of notice, or even if they put it away, which to this day we don't know.
Ironically, the Bellamy brothers lived just across the highway from the Robbers Roost Golf Club. In 2000, they were arrested and charged with numerous counts of bank robbery. They pleaded not guilty. But the forensic garment analysis was more than enough to satisfy the jury.
Most of the evidence they had was circumstantial, and this was the only forensic evidence that was basically a fingerprint that was very unique that pointed to one of the bank robbers.
All 3 were convicted. Larry and Claude were each sentenced to 50 years in the federal penitentiary.
They were the men who had taken an oath to protect these people from violent criminal activity. And they're the very people preying upon them. And so we felt that there was a certain amount of culpability that went to those two that didn't go to Alvin.
Alvin was sentenced to 15 years.
And I think it was the shirt that an FBI investigator at the lab was able to identify that this is the exact shirt that was worn in this robbery, and it matches identical to the surveillance film inside the bank. I think that that became the straw that broke the camel's back.
By the time the secret clue was discovered, almost everyone who had once worked the case was gone. The original detective was dead. The first medical examiner was retired. Several witnesses had forgotten crucial details, and the woman at the center of the investigation had been buried for 45 years beneath a name that had become almost impossible to hear without someone asking the same question. Who killed Laura Bennett? It was November 18th, Sill, 1981, in a small Missouri community where people knew one another by name, and strangers were noticed. Immediately, Laura was 26 years old. She worked at a local insurance office. She lived alone in a modest apartment above a closed hardware store. She was quiet, organized, predictable, the kind of person whose daily routine rarely changed. That was why her disappearance was immediately alarming. On the morning of November 19th, Laura did not arrive at work. Her desk was untouched. Her purse was missing. Her apartment was locked. Her car was gone. At first, co-workers assumed she was sick. Then her supervisor called her apartment. No answer. By noon, Laura's sister had been contacted. By 3 in the afternoon, police were involved. And by nightfall, the entire town knew Laura Bennett had vanished. Her car was discovered the following morning near an abandoned gravel road several miles outside town. The driver's door was unlocked. The interior was strangely clean. There was no blood. No obvious struggle. No purse. No keys. But on the passenger seat was a single white envelope. Inside was nothing. Just an empty envelope with Laura's name written across the front. That envelope became the first mystery. Who had placed it there? Why? And why had it been left completely empty? Investigators searched the area. They found tire tracks. Several sets. Most belonged to trucks and farm vehicles that regularly used the road. One set appeared newer. A partial impression suggested a dark sedan. The investigators photographed it, but there was no database capable of identifying tire patterns with the precision available decades later. The case began with uncertainty. Then came the first major break. A farmer reported seeing Laura's car around 10:30 p.m. the previous night. He remembered because the headlights were off. The car had been moving slowly. He also saw another vehicle behind it. A dark sedan. The farmer could not identify the driver. He only remembered one detail. The sedan's right headlight appeared dim. Police searched local repair shops. One mechanic remembered servicing a dark sedan 2 days earlier. The owner was Michael Reeves, 32 years old, a local salesman, recently divorced. And according to several people, someone Laura knew, Reeves denied following Laura. He denied seeing her that night. He claimed he had spent the evening at home. His statement appeared believable, until investigators discovered a receipt from a gas station 20 miles away. Time, 10:18 p.m. The receipt was issued to Reeves. He had not been home. He had been driving. The case suddenly had a suspect, but there was no body, no murder weapon, no confession, no clear motive, only a missing woman and a trail of small contradictions. Then, 6 days later, a hunter found something in the woods. A woman's coat, brown, folded beneath a fallen tree. Inside the pocket was Laura's driver's license. The discovery transformed the investigation. Police searched the surrounding area. They found blood on the leaves. The amount was small, but it was human blood. The case was now being treated as a homicide. The search expanded. Volunteers entered the woods. Police dogs searched the ravines. Helicopters scanned the fields. Laura's photograph appeared on television. Her family begged for information, and the town changed. People stopped walking alone at night. Parents warned their children not to trust strangers. Every abandoned vehicle became suspicious. Every telephone call created another rumor. Then investigators found Laura's body. It was hidden beneath several feet of soil near an old drainage ditch. The location was less than 2 miles from where her coat had been found. She had been killed by a blow to the head. The medical examiner estimated that death occurred between 10 p.m. and midnight. That placed Laura's final known movements directly inside the timeline investigators were building. But the autopsy revealed something unusual. There were no defensive wounds on her hand, no signs of prolonged struggle, no indication that she had fought her attacker for long. It suggested she knew the person who approached her. That possibility changed everything. Investigators returned to Laura's friends, her co-workers, her family, her former husband, her neighbors, and Michael Reeves. Reeves admitted knowing Laura. He admitted speaking with her, but he insisted they were only friends. Then police found a letter Laura had written 3 weeks earlier. It was addressed to her sister. She had never mailed it. The letter contained a strange sentence. "If anything happens to me, look at the blue file." Her sister had never heard of a blue file. Neither had police. The detectives searched Laura's apartment. There were filing cabinets, bills, insurance paperwork, tax documents, personal letters, but no blue file. The phrase became the second major mystery. What was the blue file? And why had Laura feared she might need someone to look for it? Investigators searched her workplace. Her supervisor said Laura had been handling a complicated insurance claim. The claim involved a local construction company. Several documents were missing. Laura had reportedly told a coworker that something about the claim didn't add up. That coworker remembered Laura appearing nervous. She had asked whether company executives could access employee files. The coworker said she did not know. Laura never explained. The construction company denied wrongdoing. Its owner, Charles Whitmore, said Laura was simply working on routine paperwork, but investigators discovered something interesting. A payment had been made from the company to Michael Reeves, $5,000, 2 weeks before Laura disappeared. Reeves described it as payment for consulting work. There was no contract, no invoice, no record of services. The payment raised suspicion, but it did not prove murder. Reeves continued to deny involvement. Then his timeline collapsed. A neighbor remembered seeing his car outside Laura's apartment on the night she disappeared. The neighbor had originally told police he could not remember. Years later, during a cold case review, he changed his statement. He said he had been afraid. He had seen Reeves arguing with Laura. He remembered Laura standing near the doorway. He remembered her saying, "You promised me." Those 3 words became critical. What had Reeves promised? The investigators never learned. Because the neighbor died before the case was reopened, his original statement contained nothing. His later recollection existed only in a private letter he had written to his daughter. The letter was discovered decades later. That was the beginning of the secret clue. But nobody knew it yet. The original investigation eventually stalled. Reeves was questioned repeatedly. He passed a polygraph. The test was not considered definitive, but it weakened the case against him. The construction company was investigated. No charges followed. The blue file was never found. The mysterious payment was explained as legitimate, and the town slowly returned to normal. But Laura's family never did. Her mother kept Laura's bedroom untouched. Her sister continued calling the police every year. Every November, she visited the cemetery. She would stand beside the grave and repeat the same sentence. "We haven't forgotten you." The case remained open, but cold. Then decades passed. People who remembered Laura became older. Some died. Others moved away. The police department changed. The original evidence was transferred into storage. Boxes were labeled. Files were forgotten. The murder became another number in a long list of unsolved Missouri cases. Then, in 2019, a new detective named Daniel Harper requested the old case file. He was reviewing unsolved homicides involving missing evidence. Laura's case immediately caught his attention. The empty envelope, the missing blue file, the unexplained payment, the dark sedan, the contradictory witness statements. Something about the case bothered him. Too many small details pointed in the same direction. Harper reopened the investigation. He requested every surviving piece of evidence: the coat, the envelope, photographs, the original autopsy report, the tire track photographs, the old interviews, and the forgotten personal letter from the neighbor. He read the letter 3 times. Then he noticed something. The neighbor had written down a license plate, not the entire number, only 4 characters. But those 4 characters matched a vehicle registered to Michael Reeves. That alone was significant. Then Harper checked the original police notes. The license plate had never appeared in the case file. Someone had removed it, or ignored it. Harper wanted to know why. He traced the evidence chain. The neighbor's statement had been taken by a detective named Robert Mason. Mason had written that the neighbor remembered nothing useful, but the neighbor's daughter still had the original letter. In it, the neighbor described the vehicle, the argument, Laura's fear, and one final detail. A man had been standing beside Reeves' car. The neighbor could not see his face, but he remembered the man's jacket, dark blue, with a silver emblem. Harper searched old photographs from the construction company. Several employees wore the same type of jacket. One man stood out, Frank Dalton, a regional manager. Dalton had overseen the insurance claim Laura was investigating. He had also been the person who authorized the payment to Reeves, and he owned a dark sedan, the same type of sedan seen near Laura's car. Dalton was dead. He had died in 1997, but his records remained. And when investigators searched his old storage unit, they found something that had been overlooked for decades, a blue folder. Inside were copies of Laura Bennett's missing insurance documents, and on the first page was a handwritten sentence. She knows. The cold case had just changed. The blue file was real. Laura had been right, and whoever had hidden it had been trying to make sure nobody ever found it, but they had failed. 45 years later, the secret was finally visible, and inside that folder was one document that could identify the person who had ordered Laura's death. The document inside the blue folder was only one page. It was badly faded. The edges were yellow. A coffee stain covered part of the bottom corner, but the handwriting remained clear. At the top was a list of numbers, insurance claims, dates, account transfers, names. Then, beneath the figures, Laura had written a sentence in black ink. Someone is using the claims to move money. That sentence explained why she had been nervous. The construction company had not simply been submitting questionable invoices. Money was being redirected through insurance settlements. Claims were being inflated. Payments were being divided. And someone inside the company was controlling the process. The name appeared halfway down the page. Frank Dalton, the regional manager. Dalton had authority over the accounts Laura was reviewing. He had access to the claim file. He could approve payments. And he had a relationship with Michael Reeves. But there was something even more troubling. Laura had written another name beside Dalton, Charles Whitmore, the owner of the construction company. 2 men, 1 financial operation, and Laura standing between them and exposure. Detective Daniel Harper placed the document beside the original case file. For the first time, the motive looked clear. Laura had not disappeared because of a personal dispute. She had discovered financial fraud. She had copied the evidence. She had planned to expose it. And someone had realized that she was about to speak. Harper searched the old financial records. The numbers in Laura's notes matched perfectly. Thousands of dollars had moved through accounts connected to the company. Some payments went to contractors. Others went to shell businesses. Several eventually reached Michael Reeves. The payments had been disguised as consulting fees, but there was another recipient, Frank Dalton. A transfer of $18,000 had been made to an account in Dalton's name less than a week before Laura disappeared. The account had been closed 3 days after her death. That was not enough to prove murder, but it destroyed Dalton's claim that he had no financial connection to the scheme. Harper searched the original investigation. Dalton had been interviewed twice. Both interviews were short. He told detectives he barely knew Laura. He denied knowing Reeves socially. He denied having any knowledge of financial irregularity, and he claimed he had been home the entire night Laura disappeared. But the cold case team found a problem, a telephone record. At 9:47 p.m., Dalton called the construction company. At 9:52, he called Reeves. At 10:06, Reeves called Laura. At 10:18, Laura left her apartment. The timing was impossible to ignore. Harper reconstructed the sequence. Dalton calls Reeves. Reeves calls Laura. Laura leaves. Reeves follows. The dark sedan appears. Then Laura disappears. The detectives needed to know where Dalton was during those hours. His original alibi came from his wife. She said he was home watching television, but his wife had died in 2003. There was no way to question her. Then Harper found a grocery receipt. Dalton had purchased cigarettes at 10:32 p.m. The store was 7 miles from his home. The clerk had written down the time because the register had malfunctioned. Dalton had not been home. He had been driving. And the store was located along the road leading toward the gravel area where Laura's car was eventually discovered. The detectives searched traffic records. Nothing. There were no cameras in 1981. No GPS. No mobile phones, but there was an old service station. Its owner had kept a handwritten log of customers who bought fuel after hours. One entry was dated November 18th, 10:41 p.m. Dark sedan, driver unknown, passenger female. The description was vague, but the vehicle had a damaged right headlight, the same detail the farmer had remembered. The station log had never been included in the original case file. Harper wondered why. He contacted the station owner's family. They still had the original ledger. The page had been torn out, but another copy existed. A carbon duplicate. It showed the same entry. The detective stared at the handwriting. Then he noticed something. The person who recorded the entry had written a note beneath it. Man said he was taking her home. Harper knew immediately that the driver had lied. Laura was not being taken home. She was being driven toward the gravel road. The investigation was accelerating, but the biggest question remained. Who killed Laura? Reeves had motive. Dalton had motive. Whitmore had motive. But the evidence needed to show who was physically responsible. Harper sent the old clothing evidence for modern testing. Laura's coat was examined again. Scientists found a microscopic fiber embedded in the fabric, dark blue wool, the same type used in the jackets worn by Dalton's company. The fiber was old, contaminated, not enough to prove who touched Laura, but investigators compared it with photographs of Dalton. He was frequently photographed wearing a dark blue wool jacket with a silver emblem, the same emblem described by the witness. Then Harper found a photograph from a company Christmas party. Dalton stood beside Reeves. Both were wearing the jackets. The photograph was dated December 1981, only weeks after Laura's murder. The image showed something else. Dalton's right hand rested on Reeves' shoulder. The two men appeared comfortable. Friends, not strangers. The original investigation had treated them as unrelated. They clearly were not. Harper began searching Reeves' financial history. The $5,000 payment before Laura disappeared was only the beginning. There had been another payment, $12,000, deposited 2 days after Laura's death. Then another, $3,500. Then another, $7,000. The payments continued for months. Reeves had received nearly $40,000. The money was coming from accounts connected to Dalton. The detective now believed Reeves had been paid to keep silent, but there was still a possibility that the payments were legitimate. The prosecution would need more. Harper found it inside Dalton's old tax record. One payment was labeled Final Settlement. The date was November 21st, Sill 1981, 3 days after Laura's body was found. There was no corresponding business agreement, no service, no invoice, only the payment. And the amount was exactly $10,000. That number appeared elsewhere. A note in Reeves' handwriting, $10K when finished. The note was found inside a box of personal papers belonging to Reeves' former wife. She had discovered it years earlier and never understood what it meant. Harper did. The payment was connected to the murder. But what did finished mean? The detectives believed it meant Laura. The next clue came from an unexpected witness, a retired mechanic named Samuel Price. Price had worked near the gravel road in 1981. He remembered Reeves bringing his car to the shop the morning after Laura disappeared. The vehicle needed cleaning. Not a normal wash, a deep cleaning. Price remembered the trunk. It smelled strongly of bleach. There were scratches inside the trunk. He asked Reeves what happened. Reeves said he had transported equipment. Price did not believe him, but he said nothing. Decades later, Price told investigators the detail he had kept secret. There had been a small dark stain beneath the trunk mat. He had cleaned it. He never reported it. The detective asked why. Price lowered his voice. Because Reeves had threatened him. He told Price that if he talked, his family would regret it. Price had been afraid for 45 years. Now he was finally speaking. The investigators searched for the old vehicle. It had been sold in 1982, then dismantled. The parts were gone. No physical evidence remained. But the testimony strengthened the timeline. Laura was likely transported in Reeves' car. Her body was later moved. Her car was abandoned. And the people involved had spent years keeping witnesses silent. The case was beginning to look less like a spontaneous murder and more like a planned operation. Harper returned to Laura's blue folder. He examined every page. The final document contained a handwritten notation. Meeting at 9:30. Then another line. FD says he can fix it. The initials were Dalton. Laura believed Dalton could fix the insurance problem. She had apparently trusted him. That made the betrayal more disturbing. Dalton had been the person she believed could help. Instead, he may have been the person who ordered her death. But there was one final sentence on the page. Michael knows where the originals are. Harper read it twice. The originals. Not copies. The documents Laura had hidden. Where were they? If Reeves knew where the originals were, he had another reason to follow her. Harper searched Laura's apartment again. The original documents were never found. Then investigators discovered a storage locker. It had been rented under Laura's name. The locker had been closed months after her death. The contents had been auctioned. The new owner had died years ago. His son remembered an old metal box among the belongings. The box had been discarded. But before it was thrown away, the son had photographed its contents. Among the photographs was a stack of documents, insurance records, financial statements, and one handwritten page. The original page was gone, but the photograph remained. At the bottom was Laura's handwriting. These prove it. Underneath, if anything happens, give them to the newspaper. Harper knew what that meant. Laura had planned to expose everything publicly. The people involved had only one chance to stop her, and they had taken it. But the photograph contained one more detail, a date. November 18th, Sill 1981, the day Laura disappeared. And beside it was a meeting location, an old warehouse, the same warehouse owned by Dalton's company. Harper searched property records. The warehouse still existed. It had been abandoned for years. The cold case team obtained permission to search it. They entered just before sunrise. Dust covered the floor. Broken windows let cold air inside. Old machinery remained against the wall. Near the rear entrance was a concrete room. The detectives found nothing at first. Then one investigator noticed scratches on the floor. A rectangular section of concrete appeared newer than the surrounding surface. Ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly. The team began removing the concrete. Beneath it was a narrow cavity. Inside was a metal box. The box was rusted shut. When it was opened, investigators found photographs, a Cosette, and a handwritten ledger. The Cosette was labeled with a date, November 18th, 81. The ledger contained payments, names, amounts, and one line that made the room go silent. Laura, problem resolved. Beside it was a signature. Frank Dalton. For 45 years, the secret had been hidden beneath a warehouse floor. Now it was finally in police hands. But the Cosette could contain something even more important. Because if the voice on that recording belonged to Dalton, investigators would no longer have to rely entirely on financial records and witness memory. They would have the man himself, speaking about Laura, speaking about the night she disappeared, and perhaps revealing exactly what happened after she walked out of her apartment for the last time. The Cosette was barely larger than a matchbox. Its plastic case was cracked. The label was yellow with age, but the date was still readable. November 18th, Sill 1981. The detectives knew they were holding something that could change the case forever. They sent it to a forensic laboratory. The tape was too fragile to play normally. Technicians cleaned the surface, stabilized the magnetic strip, then transferred the audio into a digital system. First playback produced only static. Then a door slammed. A man's voice appeared. Low, calm, controlled. "She has the copies." Another voice answered. "We need them tonight." The detectives froze. They replayed the recording. Again. Again. The first voice appeared consistent with Frank Dalton. The second sounded like Michael Reeves. Then Laura spoke. Her voice was faint, but unmistakable. "You said nobody would get hurt?" Silence. Then Dalton answered. "That depends on what you do." The recording stopped for several seconds. Then came footsteps. A chair moved. Laura spoke again. "I already sent one copy." The room went silent. Reeves asked where. Laura refused to answer. Then Dalton said something that investigators had never expected to hear. "You don't understand what you've started." The tape ended. For 45 years, investigators had believed Laura disappeared without leaving a final warning. Now they knew she had tried to protect herself. She had sent a copy of the evidence somewhere. The detectives immediately searched newspaper archives. Had Laura sent the documents to a reporter? Possibly. They searched every newspaper operating in Missouri in 1981. One reporter stood out. Eleanor Shaw. She had written several stories about government contracting fraud. She had also reported on corruption involving local construction companies. Investigators searched her old notebooks. Her family had preserved them after her death. One notebook contained an entry dated November 18th. Young woman claims she has proof. No name, but beneath it was a phone number. The number belonged to Laura's apartment. The investigators contacted Shaw's family. Her daughter remembered hearing about the story. She said her mother had planned to meet someone that night, but the meeting never happened. Then she revealed something else. Her mother had received an envelope. The envelope had arrived on November 18th. It was never opened. Why? Because Shaw believed it was connected to a separate investigation. She placed it in a file cabinet. After her death, the envelope was stored with thousands of documents. The family searched. They found it. The envelope was addressed simply, E. Shaw. Inside were photocopies of financial records. Laura's handwriting appeared on the first page. Please publish this if anything happens to me? The detectives now had independent confirmation. Laura had sent evidence to a journalist. She knew she was in danger, and she had tried to create a backup plan. But the documents were not the only thing inside. There was a photograph. Laura, standing outside the construction company. Behind her was Frank Dalton. And beside Dalton was a third man, a county official. The same official who had later dismissed Laura's financial concern. The picture had been taken secretly. Laura had been documenting the people involved. The detectives enlarged the photograph. A vehicle was parked behind them, a dark sedan. Right headlight damaged. Michael Reeves' vehicle. The case was becoming impossible to dismiss. Laura had identified the men. She had documented the vehicle. She had sent evidence to a reporter, and she had recorded the confrontation. Yet the original investigation had ignored almost all of it. The cold case team needed to understand why. They searched the original police file. Several documents had disappeared. The letter to the reporter had never been mentioned. The photograph had never been logged. The cassette had never been entered into evidence. The blue folder had vanished. The investigator who had initially handled the case had written that no evidence of organized criminal activity had been discovered, but the evidence existed. Someone had removed it. Someone had decided that the investigation would go in another direction. Harper searched personnel records. The detective responsible for the case had resigned 6 months after Laura's murder. His name was Robert Mason. He moved to Texas. He died in 2004. His widow had kept his personal notebook. Investigators obtained them. One entry was dated November 22nd, Sill 1981. Mason wrote, "Pressure from above. Told to stop chasing financial angle." That sentence explained everything. The detective had been ordered to stop. But who gave the order? The next page contained a name. Thomas Keller, county sheriff. Keller had supervised the investigation. He was also a personal friend of Charles Whitmore, and he had attended business dinners with Frank Dalton. Keller was dead, but his records survived. Investigators searched his old financial file. A payment from the construction company appeared in December 1981, $20,000. The description read, "Legal consultation." Keller was not a lawyer. There was no explanation. The payment had never been investigated. Now it was. The detectives believed the original investigation had been deliberately redirected. Laura's former boyfriend became the focus. Her financial records were dismissed. The construction company was protected. The evidence disappeared. And the case went cold. But there was still a question. Who actually killed Laura? The cassette provided a possible answer. After the argument, the recording captured footsteps. Then Laura screamed. The audio lasted 3 seconds. A heavy impact followed. Then silence. The forensic laboratory enhanced the final seconds. A voice whispered, "Hold her." The voice did not sound like Dalton. It sounded like Reeves. Then Dalton said, "Get the car." The tape ended. The investigators believed Reeves had physically restrained Laura, but whether he delivered the fatal blow remained uncertain. They searched for more evidence. The ledger from the warehouse provided another clue. A payment had been made to Reeves on November 20th. $10,000. Another payment went to a company owned by Dalton. $25,000. A third went to a security contractor. $5,000. The payments were made within 48 hours of Laura's death. The prosecution believed they represented a distribution of money after the murder. The defense would argue they were ordinary business transactions. Then investigators found the handwritten note. Reeves gets 10 when finished. That wording was stronger. The ledger had been written by Dalton. The ink matched other documents from the same period. The detectives now believed Dalton had arranged the murder, but Dalton was dead. The only person who could be prosecuted was Reeves. He had been living quietly in another state. For decades, he had denied involvement. When investigators confronted him with the cassette, he refused to speak. His attorney said the recording was unreliable. Then Harper played Laura's voice. Reeves looked at the table. He recognized her. The detective asked, "Why did she say you promised nobody would get hurt?" Reeves remained silent. Harper asked again. No answer. Then the detective placed the payment records in front of him. $10,000. 2 days after the murder. Reeves finally spoke. It wasn't supposed to happen. The room went quiet. It was the first admission. He said Dalton wanted the documents. He said Laura was supposed to hand them over. He said he was told to frighten her. He insisted he never intended to kill her. But then he described the final moments. Laura had refused. She tried to leave. Reeves grabbed her. Dalton struck her. Once. She fell. Reeves said she was still breathing. He claimed Dalton panicked. Then another man entered. The security contractor. He checked Laura's pulse. He said, "She's gone." Reeves admitted helping move the body. He admitted abandoning Laura's car. He admitted accepting money. But he claimed the decision to kill her belonged to Dalton. The detectives asked why he remained silent for 45 years. Reeves gave a simple answer. Because I was afraid. Afraid of whom? Reeves named several people. Dalton, Whitmore, Keller, and a man who had never appeared in the investigation, Arthur Bell. Bell was a local businessman. He owned the security company that had employed the contractor. He had also provided vehicles to Dalton. Reeves said Bell was the person who arranged the cleanup. Investigators searched Bell's history. He died in 1990. Again, another dead suspect? But Reeves claimed Bell had told him something on the night Laura died. He said, "They'll never find her." That sentence explained the burial location. Bell knew the desert. He knew the roads. He knew how to move someone without being seen. But investigators wanted evidence. They searched Bell's old property. The house had been demolished decades earlier. The land was now occupied by a warehouse. Nothing remained. Then they found an old well. It had been sealed. Ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly. Inside the well was an old metal flashlight. The casing was corroded. The bulb was broken. Forensic testing found traces of blood. The DNA was degraded. But a partial profile was recovered. It was consistent with Laura. The flashlight became the strongest physical evidence yet. Investigators compared its model with the missing equipment from Dalton's company. It matched. A flashlight had disappeared from the company inventory in November 1981. The inventory record carried Dalton's signature. The weapon was finally identified. But Reeves' confession created another problem. If Dalton struck Laura, why had Reeves been the only surviving suspect? Because Dalton was dead. Whitmore was dead. Keller was dead. Bell was dead. The people who could answer the questions were gone. Reeves remained. And he had now admitted to participating in the cover-up. The prosecutors had enough to charge him. But they wanted more. They wanted the entire truth. Reeves agreed to provide it. He described the meeting at the warehouse. Laura arrived believing she was meeting Dalton to discuss the insurance documents. Reeves was already there. Dalton confronted her. He demanded the originals. Laura refused. She said she had sent copies to a reporter. Dalton became furious. He accused her of betraying him. Laura tried to leave. Reeves blocked the door. Dalton struck her. She collapsed. The room went silent. Reeves said he thought she was dead. But then Laura moved. Dalton ordered him to help. They wrapped her in plastic. Hale arrived with the transport vehicle. They carried her outside. Reeves drove Laura's car away. Hale transported the body. Dalton stayed behind. The plan was to make Laura's disappearance look random. Her car would be abandoned. Her coat would be placed separately. The empty envelope would create confusion, and the financial investigation would be buried. It almost worked. For 45 years. But there was one thing they could not control. Laura had already sent the evidence. The reporter had preserved it. The blue folder had survived. The cassette had survived. The warehouse ledger had survived. The secret had survived. Reeves was arrested. The headline exploded across Missouri. 1981. Case solved. 45 years later, arrest shocks community. Secret recording breaks decades-old murder. But the story was not finished, because the prosecution now faced a devastating question. Could a jury convict a man based partly on a confession made 45 years after the crime? The defense attacked everything. Memory, evidence handling, dead witnesses, missing records, contaminated artifacts. They argued that Reeves was confessing because he was old and wanted to reduce his own guilt. But prosecutors had something the defense could not erase. His confession matched evidence investigators had never publicly disclosed. He knew about the warehouse. He knew about the blue folder. He knew about the payment. He knew where Laura's car had been abandoned. He knew the role of the security contractor. And he knew what happened inside the warehouse. Details only someone involved could have known. The trial became one of the most closely watched cases in the state. Laura's sister sat in the courtroom. She was 70 years old. For decades, she had carried Laura's photograph in her wallet. Now she watched the man accused of taking her sister's life sit only a few feet away. The prosecution played the cassette. Laura's voice filled the courtroom. For the first time in 45 years, her family heard her final word. "You said nobody would get hurt?" Silence followed. Then Dalton's voice. "That depends on what you do." Laura had been frightened. She knew. She understood. And she had tried to protect herself. But the people around her had already decided what would happen. The recording ended. The courtroom remained silent. Then the prosecutor placed the blue folder on the evidence table. 45 years after Laura disappeared, the missing file had finally returned. And inside it was the evidence that had started everything. Her handwriting. Her warnings. Her names. Her fear. Her final attempt to make sure someone would know the truth. The trial moved toward its final days. But prosecutors had one final piece of evidence. The original police file. For missing pages. Those pages contained Mason's note. Notes proving he had been ordered to stop investigating the financial connection. The defense objected. The judge allowed them. The pages were read aloud. The courtroom heard how the investigation had been redirected, how the financial evidence had been ignored, how witnesses had been overlooked, how the case had been weakened from the beginning. Laura had not simply been murdered. Her case had been buried. And now the people who buried it were finally being exposed. The jury left to deliberate. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Inside, Laura's sister held her photograph. 45 years earlier, she had watched police carry boxes out of Laura's apartment. Now she was waiting for another decision, one that could finally answer the question she had carried all her life. Would the man responsible finally be held accountable? The verdict came late in the afternoon. The courtroom doors opened. Everyone stood. The foreperson handed the verdict to the judge. The room became completely silent. Then the words were read. Guilty. Laura's sister closed her eyes. She did not smile. She simply whispered her sister's name, Laura Bennett. For 45 years that name had been attached to a question. Now it was attached to an answer. But outside the courthouse, investigators continued searching, because the verdict had solved the murder. It had not solved every secret. There were still missing documents. Still unanswered financial questions. Still people who had benefited from Laura's silence. And one final mystery remained. Why had the blue folder survived? Who had hidden it? And why had someone waited all those decades before revealing where it was? The answer came from an unexpected source. A handwritten note found beneath the false bottom of the metal box. The note was written by Laura. It was dated November 18th, still 1981, only hours before she died. It contained 6 words. I know you will find this. And beneath those words was one final instruction. Keep looking. The detectives did. And 45 years later, they finally did. The note did not contain a name. It contained a location. A street address written in Laura Bennett's handwriting, followed by a single word, basement. The address belonged to a house that no longer existed. In 1981, it had been occupied by Laura's former supervisor, Harold Pierce. Pierce had never been considered a suspect. He had been the man who reported Laura missing. He had spoken to detectives. He had comforted Laura's family. He had attended her funeral. And for 45 years, nobody had questioned his connection to the case. But the cold case team did. The house had been demolished in 1998. A new commercial building stood on the property. Harper obtained the old architectural plan. The basement had been beneath the rear section of the house. If Laura had hidden something there, it was almost certainly gone. But the investigators searched the property records anyway. They discovered that Pierce had sold the house only 6 months after Laura's death. The buyer had been a company connected to Frank Dalton. That was enough to trigger another search. Investigators contacted the demolition contractor. The company was still operating. Its owner remembered the property. He remembered finding a sealed wooden box beneath the basement stairs. He had assumed it contained old household material. The box had been removed before demolition. Where did it go? The contractor's son remembered seeing it in his father's workshop. Then the workshop burned down. Almost everything was destroyed. Almost. One object survived. A metal key. The contractor had kept it because he believed it opened something important. The key had been stored in a drawer for decades. Investigators photographed it. Then they compared it with the old plans. There was a small storage compartment beneath the basement stairs. The original plans showed a narrow steel door. No one had mentioned it. The key fit. The detectives searched old photographs of the property. In one image, barely visible behind Pierce, was the steel door. The case had suddenly opened another door. Investigators began asking why Laura would hide evidence inside her supervisor's house. The answer appeared in an old employee memorandum. Pierce had been helping Laura investigate the insurance claims. He knew the numbers were wrong. He had encouraged her to continue, but then he changed his position. He told her to stop. Laura wrote in her notebook, "Harold is scared." Another entry followed. "He knows who is behind it." Then, "He told me to destroy everything." Laura refused. That could explain the basement. Pierce may have offered her access. Perhaps he wanted to protect himself. Perhaps he wanted the evidence hidden. Perhaps he had planned to use the information as leverage. But there was another possibility. Pierce was part of the scheme. The detective searched his financial records. A payment appeared. $8,000 from Dalton's company, November 19th, Sill 1981, the day after Laura disappeared. The description was consulting. Again, no contract, no invoice, no explanation. Harper stared at the document. Too many people had received money immediately after Laura's death. Reeves, Dalton, Pierce, and others. It looked like a network, not a single conspiracy involving 3 men. A system. People were paid to move money. Others were paid to keep quiet. Someone controlled the operation. The detectives needed to identify that person. They returned to the blue folder. At the bottom of Laura's final page was a set of initials. C.W. Charles Whitmore. But beneath the initials was another mark. A small circle. Inside it was the number 7. Harper had no idea what it meant. Then a retired accountant explained it. The accountant had worked for Whitmore's company in 1981. He remembered the circle. It was used to mark confidential accounts. Number 7 referred to an internal ledger. The ledger was kept separately from ordinary company records. The accountant said only Whitmore and Dalton had access. The cold case team searched the surviving company archives. Ledger 7 was missing, but a photocopy existed. It had been submitted to an insurance auditor in 1983. The copy revealed payments made to 7 individuals. 3 were already known. Reeve, Pierce, Hale. The others were surprising. A county official, a police administrator, a private investigator, and one name that stopped Harper cold, Robert Mason, the original detective. The man who had written that he was under pressure. Mason had received money. The case file had not merely been mishandled. The lead investigator himself had been compromised. That discovery explained the missing evidence. It explained the ignored witnesses. It explained the financial investigation being abandoned. It explained why Laura's case had collapsed so quickly. Someone had built a wall around the truth, and Mason had been one of the bricks. But the ledger contained another notation. Beside Mason's name was a handwritten warning. Paid to keep file closed? The detectives had their answer. But the discovery also created a new problem. If Mason was corrupt, why had he written the secret notebook entry? Why had he recorded that he was being pressured? Why had he preserved evidence? Harper searched Mason's personal files again. This time, he found a letter addressed to his daughter. It had never been mailed. The letter was dated 6 months before Mason resigned. He wrote, "I made a terrible mistake. Then, I thought I could protect my family. And finally, I know who killed her." The name was missing. The page had been torn. Someone had removed it. The detectives suspected Mason had intended to expose the conspiracy before he was forced out, but he never did. He carried the secret for the rest of his life. Now the question became whether his daughter knew anything. She was 82. She agreed to speak. She remembered her father becoming withdrawn after Laura's murder. He stopped discussing police work. He stopped drinking with colleagues. He rarely slept. One night, when she was 16, she heard him arguing with a man in the kitchen. She could not identify the visitor, but she remembered her father's word. "You said she would be safe." The man answered, "She wasn't supposed to fight." The daughter remembered something else. The visitor left a black leather briefcase behind. Her father burned papers from it in the fireplace, but one object remained: a Cosette. She had found it years later in her father's desk. She never knew what it contained. She gave it to investigators. The forensic laboratory examined it. The tape was damaged. But after restoration, a conversation emerged. Mason was speaking to an unknown man. Mason said, "I know what happened." The other man answered, "Then you know what happens if you talk." Mason asked, "What about the girl?" The man replied, "She's already gone." The conversation ended. The voice did not match Dalton. It did not match Reeves. It did not match Hale. The detectives compared it against historical recording. The voice belonged to Charles Whitmore, the construction company owner, the man who had received the largest financial benefit from the scheme, the man who had never been questioned as a homicide suspect, the man who died in 1989. Now the investigators believed Whitmore had been the person giving order. Dalton managed the operation. Reeves carried them out. Hale moved the body. Pierce helped conceal the records. Mason helped bury the investigation. Whitmore controlled the money. But why kill Laura? Because she had evidence. And because she had refused to surrender it. The prosecutors reconstructed the final 24 hours. At 6:15 p.m., Laura left work. At 7:02, she contacted Eleanor Shaw. At 7:18, she placed documents into an envelope. At 8:11, she wrote the note about the blue file. At 9:03, Reeves contacted her. At 9:47, Dalton called the company. At 10:18, Laura left her apartment. At 10:32, Dalton was seen near the road. At 10:41, Laura's vehicle passed the service station. At 11 o'clock, she arrived at the warehouse. At 11:17, the recording began. At some point shortly afterward, Laura was struck. By midnight, her body was being moved. By 1:30 a.m., her car was abandoned. By morning, the first stage of the cover-up was complete. The investigation began, and almost immediately it was redirected. But there was one thing Whitmore had not anticipated. Laura had created multiple copies. One went to Eleanor Shaw, one went into the blue folder, and another went somewhere nobody had searched: her sister's house. Investigators returned to Laura's family. They searched old belongings, boxes, letters, photographs, Christmas decorations. At the bottom of an old sewing cabinet, they found a Cosette. The label was handwritten: Laura, November. Her sister had never played it. She had been afraid. The tape was transferred to the laboratory. Laura's voice appeared again. This time she was alone. She sounded tired, but determined. "If they find this, it means I was right." A pause. Then, "Whitmore knows." Another pause. "Dalton knows." And then the sentence that changed the entire case. "Harold says someone inside the police department is helping them." The investigators listened without moving. Laura knew. She knew the investigation itself could be compromised. That was why she had created backup. That was why she hid the blue folder. That was why she sent documents to a reporter. She knew the people surrounding her had influence. She knew they could erase records. She knew they could make her disappearance look like something else. But Laura had underestimated one thing: how far they were willing to go. At the end of the recording, Laura whispered, "If anything happens, don't believe the first story." Then the tape clicked. Silence. 45 years later, those words sounded less like a warning and more like an accusation. The first story had been wrong. The first suspect had been wrong. The first theory had been wrong. And the first investigation had been compromised. The real story was buried beneath payments, missing documents, frightened witnesses, and a network of people who believed time would protect them. But time had done something unexpected. It preserved evidence. A ledger, a photograph, a Cosette, a key, a blue folder, and one final recording. The detectives now had enough to establish the conspiracy, but they still needed to understand one final detail. Where had Laura's original documents gone? The blue folder contained copies. The newspaper had copies. The photograph showed copies. But Laura had written repeatedly about the originals. If those originals still existed, they could contain the complete financial trail, and they might reveal the person who ordered the murder. The investigators followed the trail to an abandoned bank account. It belonged to a company that had closed in 1982. The company name meant nothing until they examined its incorporation record. The listed owner was Charles Whitmore. The registered agent was Frank Dalton. The accountant was Harold Pierce. And the mailing address was a post office box. The same post office box Laura had written in her notebook. Beside it were 4 words, "Where they hide everything." The investigators obtained the old postal record. The box had been active until December 1981. Then it was closed. But someone had continued receiving mail there, under a different name. The name was unknown to investigators. It belonged to a private trust, and the trust had been opened only 3 days before Laura disappeared. Inside the surviving financial records was one final payment, $50,000, transferred on November 18th, SIL 1981. The recipient? A bank account in another state. The account holder was alive. He had never been questioned, and his name had never appeared anywhere in Laura Bennett's original case file. The detectives finally had a living link to the conspiracy. A man who had received the money. A man who knew where the original documents were, and perhaps the only person left who could explain what happened inside that warehouse on the night Laura Bennett disappeared. The name on the bank account was Samuel Crow. In 1981, Crow was 38 years old. He was a financial consultant. He lived outside St. Louis. And according to the records, he had never met Laura Bennett. That was the story. The problem was that the money told a different story. $50,000 had entered Crow's account on November 18th, SIL 1981. The transfer originated from a company controlled by Charles Whitmore. 48 hours later, Crow withdrew $20,000 in cash. Another $10,000 was transferred to an account connected to Frank Dalton. The remaining money disappeared through a series of smaller transactions. Then, in January 1982, Crow closed the account. The detectives searched for him. He was alive, 79 years old, living quietly in Arizona. For almost 4 decades, nobody had asked him about the money. Now someone finally did. When detectives arrived at his house, Crow opened the door. He saw the badges. Then he saw the photograph they were holding. Laura Bennett. His expression changed. It lasted less than a second. But Harper noticed. Crow knew her. The detective asked if he recognized the woman. Crow said no. Harper placed the bank records on the table. Crow looked at them. Then he said, "That was a long time ago." The detective asked what the $50,000 was for. Crow said it was consulting money. For what? He could not remember. Who hired him? He said he did not know. Harper asked whether he knew Charles Whitmore. Crow paused, then admitted he had met him. Once, maybe twice. The detective asked about Frank Dalton. Crow said he had heard the name. The answers were careful. Too careful. Then Harper placed another photograph on the table. It showed the warehouse. Crow stared at it. He did not speak. The photograph had been taken in 1983. The warehouse was already partially abandoned, but behind the building was a dark sedan. Crow finally asked, "Where did you get that?" Harper leaned forward. "Why does it matter?" Crow looked toward the window. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he whispered, "You don't understand what happened." Harper told him they were prepared to listen. Crow shook his head. "No, you aren't." The interview ended. Crow's attorney arrived. The detectives left without a confession, but they had learned something important. Crow had recognized the warehouse. He knew more than he admitted. The investigators obtained a warrant for his old financial records. They found another account. This one had been opened under a different name. The account contained a single deposit, $25,000. Date, November 19th. SIL 1981. The sender was not Whitmore. It was an account controlled by the county sheriff's office. The description was vague. Special services? That discovery sent investigators back to the original police department. The sheriff's office had paid Crow one day after Laura disappeared. Why? What service had he provided? The detectives searched old budget records. The payment had been approved by Sheriff Thomas Keller, the same sheriff who had ordered Mason to stop investigating the financial angle, the same sheriff who had received money from Whitmore. The pattern was no longer subtle. Money moved from Whitmore to Crow. Crow transferred money to Dalton. Keller paid Crow. Reeves received money. Pierce received money. Mason received money. The system was designed to distribute responsibility. No single person needed to know everything. But someone did. Someone sat above the entire structure. Harper returned to the ledger. The final page contained a series of initials: CW, FD, Mr., DK, HP, RM, and then SC. 7 names, 7 people, 7 payments. The circle around the number 7 suddenly made sense. Laura had found the network. She had discovered the 7 people receiving money. She knew they were connected, and she was about to expose them. But there was one question that continued to bother investigators. Why did Crow receive the largest single payment? He was not an employee. He was not a contractor. He was not a police officer. He was a financial consultant. What could he have done that was worth $50,000? The answer came from an old corporate file. Crow had specialized in asset transfer. He knew how to move money without attracting attention. He had created shell companies. He had opened trusts. He had moved funds across state lines. And 3 days before Laura disappeared, he had created a trust for Whitmore. The trust became the hiding place for the stolen money. It also became the mechanism used to pay everyone involved. The investigators now believed Crow was the financial architect, but that still did not explain the murder. Then they found a letter. It was addressed to Crow, written by Dalton, dated November 17th, 1 day before Laura disappeared. The letter contained a single paragraph. She will not cooperate. Whitmore wants this resolved tomorrow. Make sure the originals are recovered. There was no explicit instruction to kill Laura, but the implication was obvious. Resolved. The same word appeared in the ledger after Laura's death. The detectives believed the plan had already been set in motion. Recover the documents. Threaten Laura. Force her to surrender. And if she refused, silence her. The next question was where the originals were. Crow knew. The detectives returned to his house. This time they brought the bank records, the letter, the ledger, the photograph, and the Cosette. Crow listened to Laura's voice. His face became pale. When the recording ended, he asked, "Does her family know?" Harper said yes. Crow closed his eyes. Then he said, "She wasn't supposed to die." It was the same phrase Reeves had used. The detective asked him what he meant. Crow said Whitmore had ordered everyone to recover the documents. He claimed he believed Laura would simply be threatened. He said Dalton had told him Reeves would handle it. He denied being present at the warehouse. But then Harper asked one question. Where were the originals? Crow looked down. He finally answered. She gave them to someone. Who? Crow hesitated. Eleanor Shaw, the newspaper reporter. That confirmed what the investigators already suspected. But Crow added something unexpected. Shaw never got everything. Harper asked what he meant. Crow said Laura had split the documents into 2 packages. One went to the reporter. The other disappeared. Where? Crow said, with a priest. The detectives were stunned. Laura had given evidence to a priest? Crow named Father Daniel Mercer. The priest had served at a small Catholic church near Laura's apartment. He had died in 1994. Investigators searched church archives. They found his personal correspondence. Among the letters was one addressed to Laura's sister. It had never been mailed. The letter said, Laura came to me frightened. She asked me to keep something safe. Attached to the letter was a small inventory. 1 envelope. 1 Cosette. Financial records. Photographs. The second package had survived. But where? The church had transferred its records several times. The detectives traced the archive to a diocesan storage facility. There, inside an old box marked Private Correspondence, they found a sealed envelope. The handwriting belonged to Father Mercer. Inside was a note. Do not open unless Laura is confirmed dead. Harper read it aloud. She believed the people responsible had influence over the police. She feared the evidence would disappear. I promised to protect it. Behind the note was another envelope. It contained original financial records, not copied, the actual documents Laura had taken. There were invoices, bank statements, payment schedules, and one handwritten page. At the top was the date, November 18th, Sill 1981. At the bottom was a name, Charles Whitmore. Beside it was an amount, $100,000. Then another name, Samuel Crow, $50,000. The money trail was complete. But the page contained something more disturbing, a handwritten sentence. Whitmore said, "If I talk, he will make me disappear." The investigators now understood why Laura had been afraid. She had not merely discovered fraud. She had discovered people willing to kill to protect it, and she had documented the threat. The prosecutors now had a complete financial trail, but they still needed to establish what happened at the warehouse. Reeves had already confessed. The cassette contained the conversation. Physical evidence connected Reeves and Dalton to the crime. The money connected Crow and Whitmore. The original police records exposed the cover-up, but another piece remained. A witness. Someone who had seen Laura after she entered the warehouse. The investigators found that witness in an unexpected place. An old photograph from the 1981 county fair. In the background was a teenager standing beside a delivery truck. His name was Daniel Price. He had been 17. He worked part-time for the construction company. He had told police in 1981 that he saw nothing, but the detectives discovered a notebook he had kept as a teenager. One entry read, "Girl came into warehouse." Then, "Men yelling." Then, "Truck left after midnight." The entry ended with, "Don't tell." Price was alive. He was 72. When investigators showed him the notebook, he began to cry. He admitted he had lied. He had seen Laura. He had seen Reeves. He had seen Dalton. And he had seen another man, Crow, standing outside the warehouse. Price said he remembered Crow because Crow was carrying a briefcase. The detectives asked what happened after Laura entered. Price said he heard shouting, then a loud impact, then silence. Minutes later, he saw Hale arrive with a truck. He watched as 3 men carried something wrapped in plastic. Price had been terrified. Dalton saw him. He told him, "You didn't see anything." Price obeyed. For 45 years. Now he was finally speaking. His testimony completed the timeline. Crow had been there. He had not merely moved money. He had been part of the operation. The detectives confronted him again. This time, Crow stopped denying it. He admitted being at the warehouse. He admitted knowing Laura would be there, but he insisted he never touched her. He said Dalton was responsible. Then he revealed the final secret. Laura had not been killed because of the money. She had been killed because she had discovered something else, something far more dangerous. The insurance fraud was only the surface. Beneath it was a second operation. Illegal land purchases, government contracts, bribery, property transfers, and a hidden network that had been operating for years. Laura had discovered records showing that Whitmore was buying land before county projects were announced, then selling it after public money increased its value. The profits were enormous, and several county officials were involved. Laura had found proof. That was why she had to disappear. The murder was not about one stolen insurance payment. It was about a system worth millions. Crow finally told investigators where the master records were hidden. Not in the warehouse. Not in the church. Not in the blue folder. They were buried beneath an abandoned property outside the city, a location investigators had searched in 1981. They had missed the evidence by less than 50 feet. The cold case had spent 45 years circling the truth. Now the detectives had the location. They arrived before sunrise. The ground was hard. The air was cold. The old property was silent. A search team began digging. At 6:17 a.m., a shovel struck metal. The investigators stopped. Beneath the soil was a rusted ammunition box. Inside were dozens of documents sealed in plastic, and on top of everything was a photograph. Laura Bennett, taken shortly before her death. On the back, someone had written, "She found us." The detectives stared at the photograph. For 45 years, Laura's murder had been treated as a mystery. Now, the mystery was becoming a record of money, threats, corruption, and betrayal. But the box contained one final document, a contract signed by Charles Whitmore. It authorized a payment of $100,000. The recipient was not Dalton, not Reeves, not Crow, not Keller. It was a name nobody had expected, a sitting county official. and beside the signature was a handwritten instruction. After Bennett is handled, destroy this. The paper had survived. The official had survived, too. He was 86 years old. And for the first time in 45 years, detectives had a living member of the original conspiracy who could still be questioned. The case was no longer only about who killed Laura. It was about how many people had helped bury the truth. And as investigators prepared to knock on that man's door, they knew one thing with certainty. The secret had not died with the people who created it. It had been waiting. The man whose name appeared on the final contract was Harold Vance. In 1981, Vance was not a minor county employee. He was one of the most powerful men in the region. He served as deputy county administrator. He controlled budgets. He reviewed development proposals. He had access to construction plans before they became public. And according to the documents recovered from the ammunition box, he had been receiving money from Charles Whitmore for years. The investigators already knew Vance was alive. They knew where he lived. They knew he had retired decades earlier. What they did not know was whether he still remembered Laura Bennett. At 7:42 the next morning, detectives arrived at his home. The house was large, quiet, surrounded by mature trees. A black SUV sat in the driveway. The blinds were closed. Harper knocked. A few seconds passed. Then the door opened. Harold Vance stood there, 86 years old, thin, gray-haired, using a cane. He looked at the detectives without surprise. Harper introduced himself. Vance looked at the badge, then at the second detective, then back at Harper. "I've been waiting a long time for this." The sentence stopped them. Harper asked what he meant. Vance stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the house was almost unnaturally clean. Family photographs covered the wall, military decorations, certificates, awards, photographs with governors, photographs with county officials, photographs with business leaders. And on one shelf was a framed newspaper clipping. The headline described the disappearance of Laura Bennett. Vance had kept it for 45 years. Harper looked at it. Vance noticed. "I never forgot her." The detective sat across from him. Harper placed the contract on the table. Vance looked at it. He did not deny the signature. He did not claim it was Ford. He simply stared at the paper. Then he said, "That was not a payment for her?" Harper asked, "Then what was it?" Vance said nothing. The detective placed another document beside it. The ledger. Then the photograph. Then the Cosette. Vance's hands began to shake. "You found the box." It was not a question. Harper leaned forward. "Who buried it?" Vance looked toward the window. "Whitmore." "When?" "The night she disappeared." "Who else knew?" Vance took a slow breath. "Too many." The detectives asked him to name them. He refused. Instead, he said something that immediately changed the interview. Laura wasn't supposed to be killed. The sentence was familiar. Reeves had said it. Crow had said it. Now Vance was saying it too. Harper asked what was supposed to happen. Vance answered, "She was supposed to disappear." Silence filled the room. Harper asked, "What does that mean?" Vance looked directly at him. "It means she was supposed to leave Missouri." "Alive?" "Yes." "Then why didn't she?" Vance lowered his head. "Because Whitmore changed the plan." The detective asked why. Vance said, "She had already sent the documents." That confirmed the investigators' theory. Laura had created copies. The conspirators discovered it. They panicked. They decided to intimidate her. Then they realized the evidence was already outside their control. The plan changed. Vance described a meeting held on November 18th. Whitmore, Dalton, Reeves, Crow, Hale, and Vance. They met inside the warehouse. The objective was simple: recover every copy, convince Laura to leave. If she refused, they would force her into a vehicle and take her somewhere outside the county. She would be threatened. She would be told never to return. She would be given money, and she would disappear. Vance insisted he believed that was the plan. He claimed he left before Laura arrived. But Harper placed the Cosette on the table. Vance listened. Laura's voice, Dalton's voice, Reeves, then footsteps, then the impact. Vance closed his eyes. He knew the recording. Harper asked, "Were you there?" Vance said, "Not when it happened." "Where were you?" "Outside." "How do you know what happened?" Vance did not answer. Harper repeated the question. Finally, Vance said, "Dalton told me." The detectives exchanged a glance. Vance continued, "He called me after." "What did he say?" "He said there had been an accident." "Did he say Laura was dead?" Vance nodded. "He said she was gone." That phrase mattered. Not dead. Gone. As though Laura had become a problem to be removed rather than a human being. Harper asked who ordered the burial. Vance said, "Whitmore." "Who moved the body?" "Hale." "Who cleaned the warehouse?" "Crow." "Who handled the money?" "Everyone." "And who controlled the police investigation?" Vance stared at Harper. Then he said, "Keller." The name had already appeared throughout the evidence, but Vance added something new. "Keller didn't do it for money." Harper asked why. Vance said, "He did it because Whitmore owned him." The detectives wanted details. Vance described years of favor, land deals, campaign contributions, private loans, business arrangements. Whitmore had built relationships with county officials. When Laura discovered the insurance fraud, she also discovered the land transaction. That made the situation dangerous. If the documents became public, Whitmore could lose millions. Vance could lose his position. Keller could lose his career. Others could face prison. Laura had unknowingly found the center of the network. Harper asked whether Whitmore had ordered her death directly. Vance hesitated. Then he said, "Yes." The room became still. Harper asked, "What exactly did he say?" Vance stared at the floor. He said, "If she won't leave, make sure she can't talk." That sentence was the closest thing investigators had to a direct order, but Vance had more. He said Whitmore had given Dalton a small black notebook. Inside were names, payments, instructions. The notebook was supposed to be destroyed after the operation, but Dalton kept it. Why? Vance did not know. Perhaps Dalton intended to use it as insurance. Perhaps he knew the arrangement would eventually turn against him. Perhaps he simply could not bring himself to destroy the evidence. Whatever the reason, the notebook had disappeared after Dalton's death. Investigators searched his property after he died. They found nothing. But Vance claimed Dalton had hidden it somewhere nobody would think to look. Harper asked where. Vance smiled weakly. With the woman. What woman? Laura. The detectives froze. Vance explained. Dalton believed the safest place for the notebook was near the crime itself. He had hidden it inside a container used to transport Laura's belongings. The container had supposedly been destroyed, but Vance believed it had not been. Harper asked where it went. Vance gave them a location. An old municipal storage facility. The same facility where evidence from Laura's case had been transferred in 1982. The detectives left immediately. By noon, they had a warrant. The facility had been renovated several times. Thousands of boxes were stored there. Records from closed investigations, property evidence, old municipal files. The original evidence inventory showed several boxes connected to Laura's case. One was missing. Another had been marked destroyed. But the destruction record contained no signature. The cold case team searched the facility room by room. At 2:18 p.m., an investigator found a wooden crate behind several pallets. The label had been covered with another label. Beneath the newer paper, the original writing remained. Bennett, 1981. The crate was opened. Inside were objects that had never appeared in the final evidence report. Laura's handbag, a damaged Cosette recorder, several envelopes, a pair of gloves, and a small black notebook. The notebook was exactly as Vance had described it. The detectives photographed every page. The first pages contained financial transactions, then names, then dates, then instructions. One entry was dated November 17th. R. Follow her. Another. F. Warehouse. Another. H. Truck. Another. C. Documents. Then the final entry. After midnight, clean everything. The handwriting belonged to Dalton. The notebook was the missing operational record. The investigators had spent years reconstructing the crime from fragments. Now they had the instructions, the plan, the people, the timing, the cover-up. But the final page contained something different. A name. Vance. Beside it, police. That single word showed Vance's involvement. He had not merely known. He had been assigned to handle the police response. The detectives returned to Vance's house. This time, he did not deny it. He admitted making calls to Keller. He admitted telling investigators that the case should focus on Laura's personal relationships. He admitted knowing that Reeves had lied. He admitted knowing that financial records had been removed. But he denied participating in the killing. He said, "I helped bury the truth." Harper asked, "Why?" Vance looked at Laura's photograph. "Because I was afraid." Of Whitmore? Of everyone. He described Whitmore as a man who rarely raised his voice. He did not need to. People understood what he wanted: money, influence, connections, and fear. Vance said Laura had underestimated the power of the people she had confronted, but the detectives asked him something else. "Why did you keep the newspaper clipping?" Vance's eyes filled with tears. He answered quietly, "Because every year I looked at it." "Why?" "To remind myself what I had done." That admission changed the tone of the interview. Vance was not presenting himself as innocent. He was presenting himself as guilty of something, but the prosecution still needed to determine exactly what. The statute of limitations for murder did not expire, but conspiracy charges and financial crimes were more complicated. The central target remained Reed. Vance's testimony could strengthen the case, but it could also expose him to prosecution. The detectives offered no promises. Vance continued talking. He said Laura had been alive after the first blow. He had learned that from Dalton. Dalton had panicked. Reeves wanted to call an ambulance. Dalton refused. Vance said the decision was made quickly. They would not risk Laura surviving. She could identify them. She could tell police about the document. She could identify the warehouse. She could identify Whitmore. So the men decided she could not leave. Vance did not describe exactly what happened next. He said he could not bear to remember. Harper asked whether Dalton was responsible. Vance nodded. Then he said something unexpected. "Reeves helped?" The detectives already knew that, but Vance added, "He held her down." That matched the Cosette. Reeves had restrained Laura. Dalton had struck her. Hale moved the body. Crow handled the cleanup. Vance and Keller controlled the investigation. Whitmore directed the operation. The roles were finally clear. But Vance claimed there was another person involved. A person who had never been named. A woman. Someone who worked inside the insurance company. Someone who had told Whitmore what Laura knew. The detectives asked for her name. Vance said, "Margaret Sloan." The name appeared nowhere in the original case file, but she had worked in the same office as Laura. She had been Laura's co-worker. She had told investigators in 1981 that Laura seemed calm. That was apparently false. According to Vance, Sloan had been reporting Laura's activities to Dalton. She told him when Laura copied documents. She told him when Laura contacted the newspaper. She told him about the meeting with Father Mercer. And she told him where Laura kept the blue folder. The detectives searched Sloan's record. She had died in 2010. But her daughter was alive. Her daughter remembered her mother refusing to discuss Laura's death. She also remembered finding a photograph after her mother's death. The photograph showed Laura sitting at her desk. On the back were 2 words. "Too late." The detectives examined the photograph. There was a reflection in the office window. Someone stood behind Laura. A man. The image was blurry, but investigators believed it was Dalton. Sloan had been photographing Laura's work. The purpose was surveillance, not friendship. The revelation was chilling. Laura had been watched from inside her own workplace. People she trusted were feeding information to the men who wanted her silent. She had no idea how close the danger was. But one detail still bothered Harper. Why had Sloan suddenly stopped cooperating with Dalton? The answer was in a letter found among her daughter's belongings. Sloan had written, "Laura knows I am afraid." Then, "I think they are going to kill her." And finally, "I cannot help them anymore." The letter was dated November 18, the day Laura disappeared. Sloan had realized what was coming, but she did not warn Laura. She remained silent, perhaps out of fear, perhaps because it was already too late. The detectives now had another witness, another document, another piece of the chain, and another person who had lived with the guilt. The case had begun as a disappearance. Then it became a murder. Then a cold case. Now it was becoming something larger, a conspiracy that had survived for decades because everyone involved believed the same thing, that Laura Bennett was gone, that the evidence was destroyed, that the witnesses would remain silent, that the investigators would never look again. They were wrong. because the evidence had survived in places nobody had thought to search. Inside a church archive, beneath a warehouse floor, inside an old police crate, in a teenager's notebook, in a reporter's drawer, in a family's sewing cabinet, and in the memories of people who had spent decades pretending they had forgotten. The most important discovery, however, was still waiting. The black notebook contained one final page that had been folded inward. The detectives unfolded it carefully. There was a list of 7 names. Beside each name was an amount, but one name was circled. Not Whitmore, not Dalton, not Reeves, not Crow, not Vance. It was the name of the person who had allegedly ordered the final cleanup, and beneath the name was an address, a location that still existed. The investigators drove there that evening. It was an abandoned farmhouse outside the county. According to property records, Whitmore had owned it under a shell company. The farmhouse had been empty since 1984. The detectives entered after obtaining a warrant. The rooms were bare. Dust covered the floor. The windows were broken. But beneath the kitchen floor, they found a small metal compartment. Inside was a photograph, a set of keys, and the final Cosette. The label contained only 3 words. After Laura's death? Harper held the Cosette in his hand. He knew the case had reached its most dangerous point, because the recording was made after the murder, and whoever recorded it was discussing what they had done. The truth had survived. 45 years of silence were about to collapse, and somewhere on that tape was the voice of the person who had helped make Laura Bennett's cold case one of Missouri's darkest unsolved murders. The Cosette was labeled in black ink. 3 words. After Laura's death? Nothing else. No date. No name. No explanation. The detectives carried it back to the laboratory under strict evidence control. The tape had deteriorated badly. The magnetic coating was beginning to separate from the plastic. One mistake could destroy the recording forever. Technicians worked for hours. They cleaned the Cosette, stabilized the tape, transferred the audio one fragment at a time. Then, shortly after midnight, the first sound emerged. A chair scraping across a floor, a door closing, someone breathing heavily. Then a man's voice. "We have a problem." The detectives looked at each other. The voice belonged to Frank Dalton. The recording continued. Another man answered. "How bad?" Dalton said, "She's not where she was supposed to be." Silence. Then the second voice spoke again. "Did you check the car?" "Yes." "Then find her." The detectives replayed the section. The second voice was faint, but the laboratory confirmed something remarkable. It belonged to Charles Whitmore. The conversation had been recorded after Laura's death. Whitmore knew she was dead. He knew the car had been abandoned, and he believed there was still a problem. The detectives listened further. Dalton said, "The documents are missing." Whitmore responded, "All of them?" "No." "How many?" "I don't know." A pause. Then Whitmore said, "Then you don't understand the situation?" The tape crackled. Dalton asked, "What do you want me to do?" Whitmore answered, "Find the originals." The investigators stopped the playback. The implication was devastating. Laura's death had not ended the operation. The men were still searching for evidence after she was gone. They believed documents remained somewhere outside their control. The recording continued. Dalton asked, "What about the girl?" Whitmore said, "What girl?" "The reporter." A long silence. Then Whitmore said, "She's not the problem." Dalton asked, "Then who is?" Whitmore answered, "Her sister." The detectives froze. Laura's sister had been targeted. The family had never known. The recording suggested the conspirators had considered eliminating anyone who might possess evidence. But Whitmore then changed direction. He said, "No, leave her." Dalton asked why. Whitmore answered, "Because she doesn't know anything." The tape clicked. Then another voice entered. A woman. The detectives enhanced the audio. The voice was familiar. Margaret Sloan, the co-worker who had secretly reported Laura's activity. She told Dalton that Laura had given something to Father Mercer. Dalton became furious. "You knew?" Sloan answered. "She told me she trusted him." Dalton said, "And you didn't tell us?" "I was scared." Whitmore interrupted. "You should have been." The conversation stopped. The detectives replayed it several times. This was not speculation. It was a recorded conversation involving the central figure. They knew Laura had transferred evidence. They knew the priest had it, and they were still trying to locate it. That explained why Father Mercer had kept the package hidden. He had understood that the people involved were dangerous, but the tape revealed another secret. Whitmore asked Sloan, "Did she mention the detective?" Sloan said, "Mason?" Whitmore replied, "Yes." Sloan said, "She thinks he knows." Whitmore answered, "Then Mason has to be handled." The detective stared at the waveform. Mason, the original investigator. The man who later wrote that he was under pressure. The man who resigned. Now, the tape suggested Whitmore had ordered someone to silence him. The investigators immediately searched Mason's death record. He had died in 2004, natural causes, but his daughter had described years of fear. The detectives wondered whether Mason's resignation had saved his life. The tape continued. Dalton asked, "What about Vance?" Whitmore said, "Vance knows what he needs to know. And Keller? He'll keep the file clean." Then came the line that would later become central to the prosecution. Whitmore said, "Nobody talks." The tape ended. For 45 years, investigators had searched for a motive. Now they had a conversation showing exactly why Laura was killed. She had evidence. She had contacted a reporter. She had involved a priest. She had discovered corruption inside the police department. And she was preparing to expose the entire network. The detectives returned to Father Mercer's archive. The package Laura had given him was still there, but there was another document inside. A letter Laura had written but never sent. It was addressed to her sister. The letter began with an apology. "I don't want you to be afraid." Then Laura described what she had discovered. She wrote that she believed the insurance fraud was connected to county contract. She wrote that people were being paid through shell companies. She wrote that someone inside the police department was protecting the operation. Then she wrote something that investigators had not seen before. "Frank knows about the warehouse." The warehouse was not merely where Laura had been killed. It was where documents were stored. Laura had discovered that the company used the building as a temporary archive for financial records. She had seen boxes being moved there at night. She believed some contained illegal payments. She had copied what she could. The letter ended with another warning. "If I disappear, look at the land records." That instruction sent investigators back to the county archives. The land records were enormous. Thousands of transactions, property transfers, development plans, corporate purchases. But Laura had left a pattern. The properties had been purchased weeks before public announcements. The buyers were shell companies. The sellers were private owners. Then county development projects were approved. Property values increased. The shell companies sold. Millions of dollars changed hands. Whitmore's construction company benefited. County officials benefited. Financial intermediaries benefited. Laura had uncovered a corruption network, and the insurance fraud had been one part of it. The investigators mapped the transaction. The pattern stretched across 6 counties. The total value exceeded $20 million. Laura had been close to exposing it. That made her murder more than a personal crime. It was an attempt to protect an entire financial system. The prosecution prepared the case against Reeves, but the detectives still needed to establish the exact sequence inside the warehouse. The cassette provided audio. The black notebook provided planning. The ledger provided payments. The witnesses provided testimony. Physical evidence provided connection. Then, forensic specialists found something unexpected on Laura's clothing. A microscopic fragment of adhesive tape. The same industrial tape was found inside the warehouse. The type was uncommon. It was used by the construction company to seal heavy equipment. The fragment contained traces of paint. The paint matched the interior of a company truck. That truck had disappeared from the company's records after November 1981. Investigators searched old vehicle registrations. The truck had been sold to a private buyer in 1982. The buyer had no idea it had been involved in the case. The vehicle was long gone, but its maintenance records survived. A service record from November 19th showed extensive cleaning. Interior, cargo compartment, floor panels, seats. The cost was unusually high. The mechanic who performed the work was dead, but the invoice remained. It was paid in cash. The signature was Frank Dalton. The chain was tightening. Every time investigators pulled on one thread, another piece appeared. The prosecution then confronted Reeves with the new evidence. His story changed. He admitted the truck had been used. He admitted Laura's body had been transported in it. But he insisted he never knew where she was taken. Harper asked, "Who told you where to go?" Reeves said, "Hale." "Who told Hale?" Dalton? Who told Dalton? Reeves looked away. Whitmore. It was the hierarchy investigators had been building. Whitmore at the top. Dalton beneath him. Reeves and Hale executing orders. Others controlling money and police response. Reeves then revealed another detail. Laura had been conscious when they moved her. The statement stunned the detective. They asked how he knew. He said she had whispered something. What? Reeves remembered the words. Tell my sister. He said Laura knew she was dying. She knew they were moving her. She knew she might never see her family again, and her final concern was not herself. It was the evidence. Reeves said she looked directly at him and asked, why? He never answered. For 45 years that question had followed him. Now it followed the case. Why? Why had Laura been killed? Why had so many people remained silent? Why had investigators accepted the wrong theory? Why had a woman who believed the law would protect her discovered that the law itself had been compromised? The answers were in the documents. But the prosecutors still needed a courtroom-ready case. Reeves agreed to testify. His lawyers argued that he was unreliable. He was old. His memory was damaged. He was trying to save himself, but the prosecution had anticipated that. They did not rely on his memory alone. They presented the Cosette, the black notebook, the financial ledger, the bank transfers, the original documents, the police notes, the witness statements, the warehouse evidence, the truck records, the fiber analysis, the blood evidence, and the photograph. Piece by piece, the case became almost impossible to dismiss. Still, one problem remained. The prosecution could not put Whitmore, Dalton, Keller, Hale, Crow, Pierce, or Vance all on trial. Most were dead. Some were too old. Others were never charged. Reeves was the surviving participant. He became the central defendant. But before the trial began, investigators returned to the final Cosette. There was more audio. The first section had been cleaned. The laboratory discovered a second layer beneath the recorder. A conversation had been recorded over part of the tape. Technicians used digital reconstruction to recover fragments. A man's voice appeared. Where is the second envelope? A woman answered. I don't know. Laura said she sent it. Maybe the reporter has it. Then watch her. The detectives recognized Dalton. Then another voice. Crow. Don't touch the reporter. Dalton asked why. Crow said, because Laura left a trail. How much? Enough to bury everyone. The tape stopped. Then a final sentence emerged. Find the priest. The detectives understood. The conspiracy had continued after Laura's death. They had searched for the evidence. They had watched the reporter. They had considered the priest a threat. They had monitored Laura's family. They had manipulated the police investigation. The murder had not ended the conspiracy. It had only begun the cover-up. The final piece came from Eleanor Shaw. The reporter had kept a diary. In it, she wrote that someone had followed her for weeks after Laura disappeared. A dark sedan, always parked across the street. Always at night. She described the driver. A man in a dark jacket. She never knew his name. But the detectives compared the description with photographs of Frank Dalton. The match was strong. Shaw had been watched. Father Mercer had been watched. Mason had been pressured. Laura's sister had been monitored. The people involved had built a perimeter around the truth. But they could not erase everything. They could not erase Laura's voice. They could not erase the ledger. They could not erase the original documents. They could not erase the memories. And they could not erase the fact that one frightened woman had spent her final hours preparing for the possibility that she would not survive. The trial date was finally announced. The courthouse filled with reporters. Laura's family arrived carrying photographs. The prosecution entered the courtroom with boxes of evidence. The defense entered with a single argument. Too much time had passed. They said memories had faded. People had died. Records had disappeared. The state was reconstructing a crime from fragments. But the prosecutor stood before the jury and held up the blue folder. This case survived because she planned for the truth to survive. The courtroom became silent. The prosecutor placed the folder on the evidence table, then the Cosette, then the ledger, then the black notebook, then the photograph. One by one, 45 years of silence were placed before 12 jurors. And the most powerful evidence was not the money, not the recordings, not the physical evidence. It was Laura's own handwriting. A sentence written before she disappeared. If anything happens to me, keep looking. The detectives had done exactly that. And now the jury was being asked to decide whether the man sitting across the courtroom had helped turn that warning into reality. Reeves looked older than his photographs. His hands trembled. His eyes remained fixed on the table. When the prosecutor finally asked him to take the witness stand, the entire courtroom went silent. Because for the first time, one of the men who knew what happened inside that warehouse was about to speak publicly. And before he answered the first question, Reeves looked toward Laura's sister. He whispered something. The microphone barely caught it. "I'm sorry." She heard him, but she did not respond. The prosecutor stood. The first question was simple. "Mr. Reeves, did you know Laura Bennett?" Reeves looked down, then up. "Yes." The prosecutor asked, "Did you see her on November 18th, Sill 1981? Reeves swallowed. "Yes." "And was she alive when she entered that warehouse?" Reeves closed his eyes. "Yes." The courtroom became completely silent. Then the prosecutor asked the question that would define the entire trial. "Mr. Reeves, what happened to Laura Bennett after she walked through that door?" Reeves took a breath. And finally, after 45 years, he began to tell the story.